The rhythmic sound of the windshield wipers was almost mesmerizing, a steady beat against the symphony of the storm. But Leo Vance, disguised in the crisp, dark uniform of a chauffeur, was far from distracted. Every fiber of his body was tense, his knuckles white on the steering wheel as he navigated the treacherous, rain-slicked roads. He was concentrating on controlling the powerful sedan, yet the weight of his real mission clutched his chest like an invisible anchor. Behind him, in the plush leather of the back seat, Alastair and Beatrice Croft were talking in low, conspiratorial tones, but loud enough for Leo to catch every venomous word. The couple were a living image of gilded arrogance, sitting with the rigid posture of those who are used to looking down on the world, even as that world raged around their fragile metallic bubble. "It's simply unbelievable," Alastair said in an exasperated tone, adjusting the cashmere scarf around his neck as if it could ward off the indignity of their conversation. "Charlotte insists on wasting her time with this charity nonsense, as if that were something worthy of a woman of her position. It's almost a disgrace to the Croft name." "Almost," retorted Beatrice, raising a perfectly drawn eyebrow. She held a crystal goblet filled with red wine, the liquid trembling slightly with the bumps of the car. "My dear, it's completely shameful. She has every opportunity to redeem our family's standing, but instead she prefers to mingle with them." That last word was loaded with a disdain so profound it felt as though the very act of speaking it was a chore. Leo felt his jaw clench so tightly he thought it might crack, but his eyes remained fixed on the road ahead. He had to listen. He had to endure. It was the only way to confirm the ugly suspicions that had been gnawing at him for weeks. "And did you see how excited she was about that ridiculous fundraising event last week, claiming she wants to open some sort of community school, as if she had any idea how to run something so pedestrian? If she marries the right man, a man of true substance, she will never have to worry about these ridiculous idealistic projects again." Alastair nodded, his gaze turning to the rain-streaked landscape outside. "That is true, and that is precisely why we need to ensure this wedding happens. A man like Leo Vance doesn't appear twice in a woman's life. He is our ticket, Beatrice, our ticket back to relevance. An expensive ticket, perhaps, but an essential one." Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. He knew from his discreet inquiries that the Crofts were in dire financial straits. It was one of the ugly rumors that had pushed him to go undercover in the first place. But hearing them confirm, in their own callous words, that they saw their daughter, his Charlotte, as a mere pawn in their sordid game was different. It was visceral. He felt a white-hot wave of indignation run through him. Charlotte was anything but a pawn. She was a strong, generous, brilliant, and fiercely independent woman. They didn't deserve to even speak her name. A brilliant flash of lightning lit up the road ahead, revealing a dangerous hairpin bend, surrounded by tall, ominous trees that seemed to lean in like skeletal giants. Leo adjusted the steering wheel with the practiced precision of a man who understood mechanics better than he understood people, controlling the car to avoid a disastrous skid. The tension in the atmosphere inside the car seemed to increase with the storm's intensity. "You should drive more carefully," Beatrice complained, her cold eyes meeting him in the rearview mirror. "We don't want to arrive at our own party soaked, or worse still, dead. Good help is so hard to find these days." "Yes, ma'am," Leo replied, his voice a carefully modulated, neutral tone. He knew that with every word he spoke, he had to hold back the tide of contempt he felt for these people. He also knew, with a grim satisfaction, that his mission was working. They completely, utterly believed his disguise. "I do hope you've fixed the heating in the West Wing," Alastair said, turning to Beatrice, dismissing Leo as if he were part of the car's machinery. "I don't want the guests complaining about the cold. This party must be a success. If we don't project an image of unassailable strength, we will lose what little social capital we have left." "Don't worry, darling," Beatrice said, taking a long, slow sip of her wine. Everything will be perfect. Once this marriage is secured, all our worries will simply disappear." Once again, Leo felt his anger rising, a hot metallic taste in his mouth. They spoke of the marriage as a transaction, a cold, calculated strategy to redeem their social position. There was no consideration for Charlotte's feelings, no thought for the possibility that she might be falling in love with him for who he really was, not for the empire he had built. A sudden, loud rustling sound interrupted his thoughts. The howling of the wind mixed with the sharp snapping of branches being dragged across the road. Leo saw a large dark shape on the asphalt ahead and quickly, instinctively stepped on the brake, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The car skidded slightly before his expert control regained its balance, and the Crofts were thrown forward, clinging to the seat supports. "What in God's name was that?" Alistair shouted, his eyes wide with fear and fury. "Are you trying to kill us, you incompetent fool?" "I'm sorry, sir," Leo replied calmly, his voice a mask for his growing annoyance. "The road is dangerous because of the storm. There was a large branch in the way, but I managed to avoid it." "Well, next time, pay more attention," Beatrice huffed, her composure rattled. "We expect impeccable service, not a sideshow in a horror movie." Leo took a deep, steadying breath, concentrating on the road again. Every minute he spent in this car was a test of his formidable patience, but he knew he had to endure it. He was so close to the truth, and nothing would make him abandon his gambit now. The Croft mansion, a sprawling Gothic estate named Blackwood Manor, loomed on the horizon, its imposing silhouette standing out against the dark and stormy sky. The lights shone warmly in the windows, but to Leo, the place seemed more like a fortress of hypocrisy than a home. He knew that the night was just beginning, and that within those cold stone walls, more of the ugly truth would be revealed. As he parked the car at the main entrance, he glanced once more in the rearview mirror. Alistair and Beatrice were busy adjusting their outfits, straightening their ties and pearls, ensuring they were impeccable for the arrival of their guests. They had no idea that their chauffeur, the man they treated with such casual disdain, was the very person they were so desperately hoping to manipulate. Leo switched off the engine and climbed out to open the door for them. As the couple scurried out of the car, protected by the large black umbrellas that he quickly provided, he looked up at the sky and let the cold, cleansing rain hit his face for a moment. He needed that split second to pull himself together, to steel his resolve. The game was just beginning. 6 months before that tumultuous night, Leo Vance couldn't have imagined that he would be driving a luxury car disguised as a chauffeur to expose the truth about the family of the woman he was falling in love with. His world was completely different then. A world driven by innovation, achievement, hard work, and a reputation built on almost superhuman effort and an almost reclusive privacy. Leo had grown up in Albany, New York, in a small, modest house in a working-class suburb where every penny was counted and every meal was the fruit of a lot of sweat. His mother had worked exhausting double shifts as a nurse, her kindness a stark contrast to the weariness in her eyes. His father, a brilliant mechanic, spent his days and nights fixing cars in the garage of the family home, his hands permanently stained with grease, his mind always working on a new problem. Leo grew up in this environment, learning from an early age that life was difficult, but also that determination and integrity could overcome almost anything. He inherited his father's love of engines, spending countless hours in the garage, dismantling and reassembling old parts, learning the elegant logic of mechanics. This fascination soon turned into a passion for innovation. While other teenagers in his town spent their free time at parties, Leo spent his evenings in the garage, designing prototypes and studying advanced engineering textbooks he ordered from the library. That's how, at the age of 20, Leo founded his first startup in his parents' garage, focused on creating revolutionary, sustainable automotive technologies. Now, at 34, Leo Vance was a self-made billionaire. His company, Vance Dynamics, was a titan of the industry. His name was often whispered in the headlines of business magazines, where he was described as a visionary, a genius, and most frequently,
a recluse. Unlike his peers, Leo shunned the spotlight. His face was not well known as he rarely gave interviews and never attended the flashy galas his status afforded him. He believed his work should speak for itself. He never lost his sense of humility, still drove his own cars, often prototypes he was testing himself, and made a point of treating every employee in his company, from the janitors to the lead engineers, as an equal. It was at one of these rare social occasions, a quiet charity auction for a children's hospital in Manhattan, that Leo met Charlotte Croft. He had attended the event begrudgingly, persuaded by a longtime friend and board member who had insisted on the importance of showing his face just once to the philanthropic community. He had always hated these occasions.
They were mostly superficial encounters, full of fake smiles and conversations about exorbitant fortunes. But Charlotte was different. She stood in a discreet corner of the room, not schmoozing, but observing a work of art with genuine, rapt attention. The rest of the guests circulated with champagne flutes and rehearsed laughter, but she was in her own world. She wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress, without the typical ostentatious jewelry that Leo associated with the elite. When he approached her, drawn by her quiet intensity, he was surprised by the sincerity in her voice when she spoke. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said, gesturing to the abstract painting in front of her without looking at him. "People think art is about aesthetics, about its value. But I think it's more about emotion, about what it provokes inside you." Leo, a man used to conversations that revolved around profits, market caps, and investment returns, was intrigued. "I agree," he replied, his voice a little rusty from disuse in such settings. "Although it seems that most people here are more interested in the prices of the pieces than in what they represent." She finally turned to him and laughed, and the sound was like an unexpected, beautiful melody in the stuffy room. "Exactly. That's why I stay here, away from the crowd. I'm not very good at the small talk required at these galas." "Neither am I," he admitted, holding out his hand. "I'm Leo." "Charlotte," she said, her handshake firm, her eyes warm and intelligent. And so it began. The conversation flowed with a surprising, effortless naturalness, something incredibly rare in Leo's carefully guarded world. Charlotte was intelligent, passionate, and completely, refreshingly oblivious to his true identity. While others at the event would have struggled to impress him with their connections or status, she talked about her deep desire to help underprivileged communities and her dream of opening a community school focused on arts and sciences for children who couldn't afford it. She had no idea that he was Leo Vance, the reclusive tycoon. To her, he was just Leo, a nice, slightly awkward man with whom she had found an unexpected and powerful connection. Over the next few months, they met frequently. Leo, fascinated by her authenticity and goodness, made the deliberate choice to keep his financial identity a secret. He wanted, for the first time in his adult life, to be loved for who he was, not for what he had. Charlotte, for her part, seemed more and more enchanted by him, and they began to imagine a future together. But there was a shadow lurking in the background: her parents.
Leo began to hear rumors from his own network of contacts. Friends in common, financial analysts, all mentioned that the once powerful Croft family was in serious financial trouble. For years, Alistair had made a series of disastrous investments, and Beatrice, with her compulsion for ostentation and keeping up appearances, had accumulated exorbitant, crippling debts. The magnificent mansion where they lived was an empty symbol, a hollow shell of a fortune that no longer existed. And according to the persistent rumors, they were desperate to use their beautiful, kind-hearted daughter as a form of salvation, ensuring that she married a man rich enough to support the entire family and restore their tarnished name. At first, Leo refused to believe it. Charlotte was so different, so pure of heart. How could she possibly have come from such a toxic, manipulative environment? However, as the rumors became more frequent and were corroborated by his own private research, he realized that he needed to know the truth. That's when he came up with the audacious plan. By using a high-end security and staffing firm he secretly owned, he offered himself as a private chauffeur for the Crofts. The recommendation came from a trusted family friend of the Crofts, who owed Leo a significant favor. Leo hoped that by observing Alistair and Beatrice up close, he could see how they treated someone they believed to be of a lower class. More importantly, he wanted to protect Charlotte, ensuring that she wasn't being manipulated by the very people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. But the plan was incredibly risky. Leo knew that if he was found out, he could lose Charlotte forever. She could interpret his actions as a profound betrayal, a manipulative invasion of her privacy. Even so, he was willing to take the risk, because deep down he knew that the truth, no matter how ugly, was more important than anything. That night, as he adjusted his driver's cap and got into the luxury sedan for the first time, Leo felt a strange mixture of cold anxiety and steely determination. He was about to enter the world of the Crofts, where every word, every look, and every gesture would be a clue as to who they really were, and he would be ready. The day Leo took on his disguise was a masterclass in patience and a trial in his ability to adapt to a hostile environment. His first interaction with Alistair and Beatrice Croft was enough to confirm his worst fears about their characters. When he arrived at Blackwood Manor in the freshly polished black sedan, wearing the discreet chauffeur uniform he had had custom-made, he was greeted with critical, appraising glances and a calculated, chilling indifference. "You must be the new chauffeur," Alistair said, looking him up and down as if he were inspecting a piece of second-hand furniture. "Be punctual, be discreet, and do not ask questions. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," Leo replied, purposely lowering his gaze, even though he felt a lump of anger forming in his throat. The condescending way Alistair spoke to him was an uncomfortable reminder of the lean years when Leo had actually worked as a delivery driver to fund his first prototypes. He hated being underestimated, but he knew that at that moment that was exactly what he needed the Crofts to believe. Beatrice appeared next, slowly descending the grand stone steps from the main entrance, as if she were putting on a performance for an unseen audience. She wore a bright red dress that seemed entirely out of place for a simple afternoon outing, but the choice was clearly intentional. She looked at Leo with an expression of faint disdain, as if she were facing something unpleasant that needed to be tolerated, not respected. "I hope you are aware that we operate to a very high standard," she said, gesturing dramatically with a gloved hand. "If you prove to be incompetent, we will not hesitate to replace you. Drivers are disposable, after all." Leo kept his face a perfect mask of impassivity, merely nodding. Inside, he felt his anger simmering. Beatrice had said that without even a moment's hesitation, as if it were a universal, undeniable fact. He had met many people like that in his meteoric rise, individuals who believed that money or status were the only true measures of human worth. But to hear it now, knowing that this woman was Charlotte's mother, made it all the more revolting. The first journey under his disguise was to take the Crofts to a luncheon with friends from their high society circle. In the back seat, the couple chatted, completely oblivious to Leo's presence, as if he were an inanimate object, a part of the car itself. This attitude was, ironically, useful for his plan, but at the same time it was a constant, grating blow to his self-control. "The situation is becoming untenable," Alistair said in an irritated tone, running his fingers through his thinning gray hair. "The creditors are starting to call the mansion directly. Can you imagine the sheer embarrassment of it all?" "We simply need to be more strategic," Beatrice replied, her voice cool and calculating. "Charlotte is already completely enchanted by this Leo Vance. All we need is for him to propose. After that, we will be safe. He is more than capable of supporting us, even with our, current circumstances." Leo felt his blood run cold. There it was, an undisguised, chilling confirmation of what he had feared most. This wasn't just about difficult or controlling parents. Alistair and Beatrice were actively, consciously using their own daughter as a pawn in their desperate financial survival plan. It was clear that they didn't see Charlotte as a person with her own hopes and dreams, but as a solution to their own self-inflicted problems. What worried him most, however, was that Charlotte seemed completely unaware of this. In all the deep, honest conversations Leo had had with her, there was never any indication that she knew how serious her family's financial situation was. I knew she was intelligent, but the Crofts were masters of dissimulation, and Charlotte, with her genuine and generous nature, had perhaps never learned to see the manipulation that was woven into the very fabric of her family. After dropping them off at the restaurant, Leo parked the car on a quiet side street and sat behind the wheel reflecting on everything he had seen and heard. Every minute he spent under this disguise felt like a trial by fire. He knew he had to keep going, but with each new ugly fragment of truth he uncovered, the weight of his disappointment grew heavier. Later that afternoon, while waiting to take the Crofts back from their luncheon, Leo witnessed another revealing scene. Beatrice, a glass of wine in her hand, even in the middle of the day, was in the garden viciously scolding a young maid who had accidentally dropped a tray of empty glasses. "I told you to be more careful, you clumsy girl," Beatrice exclaimed, her face contorted with a disproportionate frustration. "Do you have any idea how much we work to hire people, and this is the competence we get in return?" The young woman, clearly intimidated, lowered her head and apologized profusely, but Leo could see the shame and humiliation in her eyes. He knew what it was like to be treated like that, as if your worth was measured only by what you could offer your supposed superiors. He desperately wanted to intervene, to say something, but he knew he couldn't break his cover. When the Crofts finally emerged for their next appointment, Beatrice continued to complain, now directing her frustrations at him, the driver. "I certainly hope you can drive more skillfully than that girl can carry a tray," she said, getting into the car without even looking at Leo. He nodded again, his face a stony mask, but inside he was fighting the powerful urge to confront her. More and more he saw that these people had no limits to their arrogance. For them, everything was about power, control, and the maintenance of appearances. It was obvious that Beatrice and Alistair were willing to crush anyone they considered inferior to achieve their goals, and he now feared that included their own daughter, should she stand in their way. That evening, as he parked the car back at the mansion and watched the Crofts walk inside without much as a perfunctory goodbye, Leo sat in the car for a few long minutes, processing everything he had seen and heard. He thought of Charlotte, so full of life and light, so fundamentally different from her parents. How could she have grown up in such a toxic environment and still remain so good, so pure? Perhaps, he thought with a sinking heart, that was precisely why they saw her as the perfect tool. She was the opposite of them, and therefore the perfect bait to attract someone like him. He knew he had to keep going. He needed to gather more concrete information before making any decisions about how to reveal the truth. But one thing was now certain. The Crofts weren't just manipulative. They were dangerous to Charlotte's spirit, to her future. And he would not, under any circumstances, allow the woman he loved to be used like that.
The air inside the black sedan was charged with a palpable tension. Every word Alistair and Beatrice Croft exchanged seemed sharper, more revealing than the last. Leo Vance, still firmly entrenched in his disguise as their chauffeur, felt that every minute spent in that car brought him closer to the truth, but also plunged him deeper into a murky pit of deception and moral dilemmas. It was a particularly dark night, the approaching storm beginning to rattle the skies as Leo drove the Crofts to a high-stakes gala dinner. Alistair, as was his custom, was complaining. "These roads are getting worse and worse. It's simply not possible that we pay such exorbitant taxes to have to deal with these potholes," he grumbled, crossing his arms and glaring at Leo in the rearview mirror as if he personally were responsible for the state of the city's infrastructure. Beatrice replied with her usual sarcasm, rolling her eyes. Darling, people like him don't even vote. Don't expect them to understand the intricacies of civic responsibility. Leo held back the sharp retort that was on the tip of his tongue, keeping his expression stoic. It was a game, a dark and twisted one, and he knew he had to play it to the end. However, the casual, natural way they dismissed others was beginning to weigh heavily on his mind. In the back seat, Alistair changed the subject, and that's when the complications began to intensify. He pulled a thick manila envelope from his inside jacket pocket, opening it to reveal a set of legal documents. Leo could see from the rearview mirror that they were related to property deeds. He made a point of looking disinterested, his gaze fixed on the road, but his ears were tuned to their conversation. "This is all we have left," Alistair said, his voice laced with a raw frustration. "If we cannot secure this marriage, Beatrice, we will lose even the cottage in the Hamptons. It is unbearable to think that our family has come to this." Beatrice, on the other hand, sounded more resigned, her voice hard. "Then we will do whatever it takes. Charlotte is almost there. She is already completely enchanted by this Leo Vance. Have you seen the way she talks about him? It is only a matter of time before he proposes." "And if he doesn't?" Alistair retorted, frowning, a line of sweat beading on his temple. "What if he finds out about our situation before then? What if Charlotte lets something slip?" Beatrice let out an impatient, dismissive sigh. "Darling, he won't. Charlotte has no idea of the true extent of our situation, and she certainly is not going to tell him something she doesn't know. As long as he believes we are a respectable, solvent family, he will feel obligated to protect her, and by extension, to protect us. It's a matter of honor for men like him." These words were like a physical punch in the gut for Leo. What he had heard so far had already been terrible, but this confirmed something even worse. The Crofts weren't just manipulating their daughter out of desperation. They were actively and consciously weaving a web of lies, using her innocence as their primary weapon. They were playing a dangerous game that Leo knew was dangerously close to destroying Charlotte's trust in him forever should she ever discover his own elaborate espionage plan. Later that evening, while waiting outside the gala, Leo overheard a snippet of conversation between Alistair and another guest that reinforced his deepest suspicions. He had strategically positioned the car near the entrance, and with the windows slightly open, he could hear part of their discussion as they smoked cigars. "So, Alistair, you really think this wedding is going to happen?" the man asked, his tone slightly mocking. "I have my doubts." "I am sure of it," Alistair replied, his voice full of a false bravado. "Leo Vance is an intelligent man, but he is a man of principle, and men like that, my friend, are remarkably easy to manipulate. They always think they can save the world, that they can rescue those they love. Charlotte will be our bridge to a safe and prosperous future. He would never stop looking after her, and by extension, us." "A risky strategy," the other man commented, with a short, harsh laugh, "but considering your current situation, I don't suppose you have much to lose." Leo gripped the steering wheel so hard that his fingers turned white. He didn't know which was worse, Alistair's blatant, unashamed cynicism, or the fact that there was a stranger standing there validating his disgusting approach. The feeling of being watched, of being played like a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was a part of, disgusted him. However, he knew he couldn't react. Not yet. That night, as he drove the Crofts back to their mansion, Leo couldn't stop his mind from filling with doubts. He loved Charlotte, that much he was sure of. But what would he do when she knew all of this? How would she react to knowing that her own parents were willing to use her love in such a cold and calculating way? And more importantly, how would she react to discovering that he, the man that she was falling in love with, had gone undercover to expose this very truth? The deception felt like a heavy cloak, suffocating him. The tension inside the car was palpable, a thick, unspoken thing. But ironically, the Crofts were completely oblivious to Leo's inner turmoil.
Beatrice reclined in the back seat, exhausted after an evening of empty conversation and forced compliments. Alistair, meanwhile, was frowning at his phone, his face illuminated by the cold blue light. These investors are becoming unbearable. If only this Vance fellow would be more public about his intentions with Charlotte, we could leverage that to our advantage. Beatrice sighed wearily. Give it time, darling. He is still at the beginning of his relationship with our daughter. Soon everything will become clearer. We will get what we need. Back at the mansion, Leo helped Beatrice out of the car, while Alistair muttered something about needing a stiff drink before bed. When he was finally alone in the car, the silence of the night pressing in on him, Leo allowed himself to take a deep, shuddering breath. Every day, the situation became more complex, more dangerous. He knew he was heading for a moment of inevitable, explosive confrontation. The only question was when and how. As he watched the lights of the mansion gradually fade, Leo made a silent promise to himself and to the image of Charlotte he held in his mind. No matter what happened, he would protect her. But to do that, he would need to be more careful, more patient than ever before. The Crofts were masters of the game they played, but Leo had something they didn't: integrity, and he was willing to use it as a weapon to turn their own tables against them.
The Whitmore mansion was shrouded in an eerie silence that morning. The shy, watery sun illuminated the huge, imposing windows, but the atmosphere within remained tense and shadowed. Leo Murray knew that this day would be decisive. He felt the immense weight of responsibility growing on his back, a physical pressure in his chest, but he no longer had time to hesitate. There was something in the last few days, in Beatrice's furtive, nervous glances and Alistair's growing, barely concealed anxiety, that warned him they were ready to strike the final blow, to push Charlotte towards a proposal. Leo arrived at the mansion early, as was his custom, but this time he had a concrete plan in mind. He needed tangible, undeniable evidence of the Crofts' true intentions. Whispered, damning words in the car were one thing, but they could be denied. He needed something irrefutable. As he waited in the driveway, pretending to polish the car's chrome, Leo observed the routine of the house. Beatrice, always the picture of feigned perfection, was giving sharp, clipped orders to the household staff. Alistair was locked in his study, a place he rarely left these days. Leo had seen him bring in a pile of confidential-looking papers the night before. The opportunity to act arose when Alistair, looking pale and stressed, went out to take a heated phone call in the garden, leaving his office unlocked. John, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs, quickly and silently entered the lion's den. He began to rummage through the mahogany desk. He found what he expected: unfinished contracts, records of mounting debts, and most alarmingly, recent correspondence between Alistair and a creditor who was threatening to seize the mansion within a matter of weeks. But what truly made his blood run cold was a folder with Charlotte's name elegantly inscribed on it. Inside were letters drafted by Alistair intended for him, for Leo Vance, but never sent. In them, Alistair painted a picture of a desperate, concerned father begging for financial help and using Charlotte as an emotional bargaining chip. "You love my daughter," Leo read from one of the drafts, the words feeling like poison on his tongue. "And as her father, all I want is to ensure she has a safe and comfortable future. But to do that, to protect her from the harsh realities of this world, we need your help." Leo felt his stomach turn. He knew that Alistair was manipulating the situation, but seeing how far he was willing to go, even crafting these pathetic, begging letters, disguising his greed as fatherly concern, was the last straw. Later that day, Leo drove the Crofts to a critical lunch with potential investors.
The tension in the car was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Beatrice, wearing an extravagant diamond necklace that he knew had probably been bought on credit, talked excitedly, her voice artificially high, about the family's bright future. "With these new investments, we'll finally have the resources to revitalize our country house," she said, glancing pointedly at Alistair. Alistair replied with a short, tight smile, but Leo could see the raw panic hidden in his eyes. They were approaching an abyss, and Alistair knew it better than anyone. "Joe," Beatrice said abruptly, using the false name Leo had given, "please take extra care when you pick us up later. We need to be impeccable for the evening's gala. We don't want dear Charlotte to have anything to be ashamed of when she arrives with Mr. Vance." Leo felt a familiar wave of anger run through him, but he kept his composure, his face a neutral mask. "Yes, ma'am," he replied calmly, knowing that every second was another step closer to the inevitable, violent explosion of truth. It was on the way back to the mansion later that afternoon that the confrontation finally, unexpectedly took place. The rain was starting to fall again, a steady gray drizzle, and the rhythmic sound of the drops against the roof of the car seemed to echo the growing unease in the air. Alistair, apparently unable to contain his spiraling anxiety any longer, began to speak, his voice a harsh whisper. "We need to make sure this Vance fellow proposes as soon as possible," he said bluntly, forgetting, or perhaps no longer caring that their driver could hear them. "Charlotte is already completely smitten, but time is against us. If he finds out about our debts before then, we will be utterly ruined." Beatrice sighed, a sound of pure exhaustion. "Yes, darling, but we must be careful. We cannot appear desperate." Leo, unable to listen to another second of their vile plotting, felt the adrenaline finally take over. He looked through the rearview mirror, his gaze locking with Alistair's. "That is very interesting to hear, Mr. Croft," he said, his voice dangerously calm, but carrying an unmistakable firmness that made them both freeze. The silence in the car was instantaneous and absolute. Beatrice and Alistair exchanged alarmed, panicked glances. What do you mean by that?" Alistair asked, trying to keep his composure, but his voice was an octave higher than usual. Leo pulled the car smoothly into the mansion's driveway and turned off the engine. The only sound was the rain and their own ragged breathing. He slowly turned in his seat to face them, deliberately taking off the chauffeur's cap that was the symbol of his disguise. "I mean that perhaps you should know who is really driving this car." Beatrice turned deathly pale. Alistair, on the other hand, seemed to freeze completely, his mind unable to process what was happening. "I am Leo Vance," he said, letting the name hang in the air between them. "And yes, I came here to find out the truth, because contrary to what you seem to believe, I do not make decisions of this magnitude blindly. And now I know exactly what kind of people you are." The tension exploded like lightning inside the car. Beatrice tried to regain her composure, but her words came out shaky and unconvincing. We were just trying to protect our family." "Protection?" Leo interrupted, his voice rising for the first time, laced with a fury he could no longer contain. "You were using your own daughter as a bargaining chip to save yourselves. That is not protection. It is selfishness, and it is unforgivable." Alistair tried to defend himself, a string of pathetic excuses tumbling from his lips, but Leo held up his hand, silencing him. "I don't want to hear any more of it. You took advantage of Charlotte's kindness, of her trust, and the worst part of all is that she has no idea what you are doing behind her back." The rain was now coming down in full force. the sound of thunder in the distance seeming to accompany the brutal confrontation. Beatrice, finally unable to keep up her facade of aristatic grace, began to cry, her mascara running down her cheeks. "Please," she begged, her voice a pathetic whimper. "Please don't tell her. Charlotte wouldn't understand. She would never forgive us." Leo was silent for a long, heavy moment, his gaze unwavering. Finally he spoke, his voice cold with a righteous finality. "Charlotte deserves to know the truth, and she will, but she will not hear it from you." Without saying another word, he got out of the car and walked with firm, resolute steps into the mansion, leaving the Crofts behind in the rain and the wreckage of the chaos they had created.
The rain fell like a liquid curtain over Blackwood Manor, but inside its imposing, silent walls, an even bigger, more devastating storm was about to explode. Leo Vance crossed the grand entrance hall with firm steps, his wet shoes marking the spotless marble floor. He carried an unwavering, painful determination in his eyes. There was no more room for doubt, no more time for hesitation. Charlotte was in the main hall, curled up in an armchair near the massive fireplace with a book in her hands. The warmth of the fire contrasted sharply with the icy chill Leo felt inside. She smiled when she saw him enter, a bright, beautiful smile that twisted the knife in his gut. But her expression quickly faded when she noticed the grave, stormy look on his face. "Leo?" she asked, getting up, her book falling to the floor forgotten. "What's happened? Are you all right?" Before Leo could answer, Alistair and Beatrice rushed through the front door, still shaking, their faces pale and drawn. Beatrice tried to force a smile, but her attempt to look carefree was miserably, transparently false. Alistair, for his part, looked as if he was about to explode with rage, but he somehow maintained a shaky facade of control. "Charlotte," Beatrice began, her voice artificially bright, ignoring Leo completely. "Darling, we need to talk to you about something important." Charlotte frowned, her gaze flickering between her parents and Leo, her confusion growing. "What's going on?" Leo held up his hand, interrupting Beatrice before she could spin another web of lies. His voice was firm, but charged with a deep, painful emotion. "No, they won't be the ones to tell you. I will." Charlotte looked from one to the other, her confusion turning to alarm. "Can someone please explain to me what is going on?" Leo took a deep, steadying breath. This was it, the moment of truth. "Charlotte, there's something you need to know about your parents and about me. I'm not exactly who you think I am. I am Leo Vance, the man you've been dating, but for the last few weeks I have also been disguising myself as your family's chauffeur in order to understand what is really going on in this house." Charlotte's eyes widened, sheer disbelief etched across her beautiful face. "You... what? You disguised yourself as our driver? Why? Leo, that's insane." Before Leo could answer, Alistair exploded, his control finally snapping. "He did it because he doesn't trust us. He's trying to paint us as villains when all we have ever done is tried to protect you." Leo turned on him, his own anger finally boiling over, raw and unrestrained. "Protect her? You were using your own daughter to save your own skin. You manipulated her, you lied to her, you were prepared to sell her off to the highest bidder. That is not protection, Alistair. That is betrayal of the highest order." Charlotte raised her hand, her voice shaking but firm. "Enough, both of you. Can someone please just explain to me what you are talking about?" Leo looked into her eyes, feeling his own heart squeeze with the pain he was about to cause her. "Charlotte, your parents are facing catastrophic debts. They are about to lose everything, and they were counting on our relationship as their financial solution. They wanted me to save them, using you as the bridge to my fortune." The silence that followed was heavy,
almost unbearable. Charlotte slowly turned to look at her parents, who immediately looked away, unable to meet her gaze. Their guilt was a palpable thing in the room. Her expression shifted from confusion to a dawning, horrified understanding, and then to something Leo could only describe as utter devastation. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. Beatrice began to cry, fat, theatrical tears, while Alistair stared at the floor, a coward unable to face his own daughter. "Charlotte, please, we just wanted what was best for you and for our family." "Best for me?" Charlotte repeated, her voice incredulous, laced with a pain that tore at Leo's soul. "You were lying to me? Using me? How can that possibly be what is best for me?" Leo stepped forward, an instinctive protective gesture, trying to reach her. "I know this is a lot to process, Charlotte, but I needed you to know the truth. I did all of this because I love you. I needed to protect you from them." But Charlotte pulled away from him, tears now starting to run down her face. "Protect me? You lied to me too, Leo. You disguised yourself. You infiltrated my life, my family without telling me. How is that any different than what they did? You all lied to me." Leo felt the blow of her words as if it were a physical strike. He tried to speak, but the words seemed stuck in his throat, choked by his own complicated guilt. Meanwhile, Alistair began to plead, his voice desperate. "Charlotte, please, you have to understand. We did this out of desperation. We had no other choice." "You always have a choice," she replied, the deep pain in her voice now turning to a cold, hard anger. "But you chose to lie. You chose to use me." Beatrice fell to her knees, a dramatic, calculated gesture grabbing the hem of Charlotte's dress. "We are your family, Charlotte. Please don't abandon us. We don't know what to do without you." Charlotte took a step back, her gaze now full of a new, steely determination. Family? A family that lies, that manipulates, that uses its own members to save itself? That is not family. That is selfishness. Leo finally found his voice, his words thick with a desperate sincerity. "Charlotte, I know what I did was wrong. I know I broke your trust, but everything I did to find out the truth and to protect you. I love you, and I don't want to lose you because of this." She looked at him, the pain and disappointment swirling in her beautiful eyes. "I need time, Leo. I need time to think. I don't know who to trust right now. Everything feels like a lie." Silence filled the room again, heavy and suffocating. Charlotte took one last long look at her parents, now huddled together in their despair, and then at Leo, the man she loved, who had also deceived her. Then, without another word, she turned and left the hall, her footsteps echoing on the marble as she headed for the stairs. Leo stood there, frozen, feeling the immense weight of his actions. He knew he loved her, more than anything in the world, but in his quest to save her, he might have just lost her forever.
The sun was setting over Blackwood Manor, tinting the bruised sky with shades of orange and gold. Charlotte was sitting in her bedroom, looking out of the window at the garden where she had played so often as a child. That place, which had always been a safe refuge, now seemed haunted, full of complicated, tarnished memories. The devastating revelations of the last few days had shaken the very foundations of everything she thought she knew about her family, her relationship with Leo, and, most importantly, about herself. She sighed and reached for her cell phone. She was hesitant, her thumb hovering over his name, but she knew she couldn't avoid this conversation forever. Leo deserved an answer, a chance to explain without her parents' desperate theatrics. And she deserved, perhaps, a chance to start again. Leo was sitting on the balcony of his penthouse apartment, looking out at the glittering, indifferent horizon of Manhattan, when the sound of his private elevator arriving caught his attention. He stood up, his heart beating fast with a mixture of hope and dread when he saw Charlotte get out of the car he had sent for her.
He felt a surge of desperate hope and crushing anxiety all at once. She walked towards him, her eyes shining in the twilight, but her expression was serious, unreadable. "Charlotte," he said, his voice barely a whisper, trying to gauge her reaction. She offered a small, hesitant smile. "Hi, Leo. Can I come in?" "Of course," he replied, moving to open the glass door for her. "Always." They sat down in the minimalist living room, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick with unspoken words. Leo, unable to contain his emotion any longer, was the first to break it. "Charlotte, I am so sorry for everything. I know what I did was a betrayal of your trust, and I will never forgive myself for lying to you, even if it was with the best of intentions. I love you, and all I want is your happiness, even if that means giving us up." Charlotte looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, but her expression was softer, not angry. She spoke. "Leo," she began, her voice firm and clear, "you lied to me. You hid the truth from me, and you infiltrated my life without me knowing it. And that hurt me. It hurt me deeply." He lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze, but she continued, her voice now softer. "But," she said, and he looked up, "you also showed me something that no one else had the courage to do. You opened my eyes to the reality of my family, a truth I probably should have seen for myself years ago. And most importantly, you did it because you care about me. Even if the way you did it was wrong, it was done out of a fierce, protective love. And that means something to me." He looked up, his eyes wide with a fragile, dawning hope. Do you really believe we can get over this?" Charlotte smiled a genuine, beautiful smile, the first one he had seen in days. "I believe that if we work together, and if we promise to be completely, brutally honest with each other from now on, we can get through anything." He felt a wave of profound relief and joy wash over him. "I promise, Charlotte. There will never be lies between us again. I want to build something real with you, something solid and true." She nodded, reaching out and taking his hand in hers. "Me too." In the months that followed, Alistair and Beatrice Croft began the painful process of rebuilding their lives. Faced with public disgrace and financial ruin, they sold off their unnecessary possessions, including Blackwood Manor, and learned for the first time in decades to live simply. Their relationship with Charlotte remained complicated, a landscape of hurt and regret, but she had set clear, firm boundaries, something they, humbled by their fall, now respected. Surprisingly, Leo offered to help them sort out their debts, not as a bailout, but as a structured loan on one strict condition: absolute transparency about how every dollar would be used. Alistair, although his pride was wounded, accepted, grateful for the chance to start again with the semblance of dignity. A year later, Leo took Charlotte on a special trip to Albany, the small town where he had grown up. He wanted her to see the place that had shaped him, a place that was simple but full of meaning and integrity. As they walked through a quiet park at sunset, the air crisp and clean, Leo stopped and took both of her hands in his. "Charlotte," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "this past year has been proof that we can overcome anything together. You are the most incredible, resilient, and compassionate woman I have ever met, and I don't want to spend another day of my life without you by my side." He knelt down on one knee, taking a small velvet box out of his pocket. When he opened it, a simple but elegant diamond ring sparkled in the light of the setting sun. "Charlotte Croft, will you marry me?" She laughed, tears of pure joy streaming down her face as she nodded frantically. Yes, Leo, yes, 1,000 times yes. He stood up, slipping the ring on her finger and pulled her into a tight, loving embrace. As they kissed, the sound of children playing in the distance and the gentle rustling of the wind in the trees seemed to compose the perfect soundtrack for that perfect moment. A few months later, they married in an intimate, beautiful ceremony, surrounded only by their closest friends and family. Charlotte walked down the aisle next to Alistair, who for the first time in his life seemed truly, humbly moved. Beatrice also looked different, more humble, clearly regretful of her past actions, but grateful to still have her daughter in her life. At the end of the ceremony, Leo and Charlotte shared a dance under the stars. Now, as husband and wife, they knew the road ahead wouldn't always be perfect, but they were ready to face it together. Together, with love and honesty as their unshakable foundations. And so, they began a new chapter, not as perfect, flawless heroes, but as real people who had learned to love, to forgive, and to grow even in the face of the most difficult adversity.